anything. It's dragging her under. She's not coming up. Somebody, please help her.
The screams echoed off the concrete walls of SeaWorld Orlando. Tourists dropped their phones. Children burst into tears. Security staff ran slipping on puddles near the pool's edge. But it was too late. A massive black and white figure had exploded from the water jaws clamped around something or someone. There was splashing, thrashing, the unmistakable swirl of red mixing with the turquoise blue of the performance tank. Then silence, just gasps, cries, confusion. What was supposed to be a quiet late afternoon encounter, a magical behind-the-scenes moment between one of SeaWorld's most beloved trainers and the park's largest orca, had turned into a nightmare playing out in real time. And the worst part, it wasn't an accident. Dawn Brancheau, 40, was one of the most experienced trainers in the park's history. She'd worked with killer whales for over 15 years. She knew their language, their signals, their moods, their quirks. She wasn't just a trainer. She was a caretaker, a voice, and for many, the heart of the Shamu show. That day, February 24th, 2010, she was wrapping up a casual lunchtime event called Dine with Shamu. It wasn't even a formal show. Guests sat around enjoying food while the whales did a few gentle tricks. It was personal, intimate, calm. And then Tilikum struck. He didn't lunge during the show. He waited until after, when Dawn was kneeling near the water's edge, casually feeding him. Some say he grabbed her ponytail. Others think it was her wetsuit sleeve. Either way, it happened fast. Too fast. He pulled her in, and he didn't let go. Eyewitnesses described the horror. He just kept shaking her. Over and over, one visitor told reporters, later hands trembling. She didn't even scream. Not after the first time, just bubbles. Tilikum, a 12,000-pound male orca, had been in captivity for decades. This wasn't his first violent encounter. But that day it was different. This time there were no excuses, no darkness to blame, no trespassing victims. Just daylight, a full audience, and a beloved trainer who should have been safe. And as he dragged her deeper into the pool, refusing to respond to emergency calls or hand signals, every second ticked louder than the last. He wasn't playing. He was in control. And the woman who loved him most was drowning in front of the world. Before we go deeper into this heartbreaking story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. If you care about the complicated relationship between humans and animals, the beauty and the tragedy of that bond, this channel is for you. Animal Story brings you true, powerful stories that will leave you thinking long after the video ends. Subscribe now and be part of the journey. To understand how this tragedy really happened, how a woman who devoted her life to these creatures could end up dying at the hands of one she loved, we need to go back. Back to where it all began. Back to the icy waters of Iceland. Back to a baby orca, torn from the ocean. Before the headlines, before the documentaries, before the courtroom debates and social media outrage, there was just a woman and a whale. Her name was Dawn Brancheau. And if you had ever visited SeaWorld Orlando before 2010, chances are you saw her smiling on stage. Petite, athletic, with a long ponytail and a wetsuit that fit her like armor, she wasn't just another trainer. She was the trainer, the face of the Shamu show. Born and raised in Indiana, Dawn was one of those kids who grew up dreaming about the ocean, even though she lived hundreds of miles from it. While her classmates decorated their lockers with boy band posters, Dawn kept photos of dolphins, whales, and marine rescues. At age 9, she went to SeaWorld with her family. She watched a killer whale leap out of the water and splash the crowd, and something inside her just clicked. That day, she told her mom, "I'm going to be one of them someday." She didn't mean the whales. She meant the people who spoke to them. Dawn worked her way up the hard way. She wasn't handed anything. She started by cleaning fish buckets and scrubbing floors. She studied psychology and animal behavior in college, spent her weekends at animal shelters, and never missed a chance to shadow marine biologists. Her dedication wasn't about fame or performance. It was about connection. By the time she was 40, Dawn had been with SeaWorld for over 15 years. She had the scars, the muscles, and the instincts that only come with experience. Other trainers respected her. The whales responded to her. Parents trusted her with their kids' questions. She was the kind of person who could make a 6-ton predator seem like a puppy. And she had a soft spot for the biggest, most complicated one of all, Tilikum. Tilikum wasn't like the others. He was massive, over 22 feet long, weighing close to 12,000 pounds. His dorsal fin drooped to one side, a sign of captivity, His eyes carried years of stories he couldn't tell. Most trainers didn't want to work with him. He had a history, he had moods, he had tragedy wrapped around him like a shadow. But Dawn saw something different. She didn't just follow protocol with Tilikum, she built a relationship. She spent early mornings by his tank, talking softly while others kept their distance. She knew how to read his movements like lines in a book, how he flicked his tail when bored, how he circled twice before surfacing, how his jaw clicked when frustrated. They had a rhythm. She called him Tilly. To the outside world, it looked like trust. And maybe it was, but it was also more than that. Dawn had built her career, her life, around the belief that animals, no matter how large, no matter how feared, could love, connect, and heal. That belief was her strength. And maybe, just maybe, it was also her blind spot. Colleagues warned her. He's unpredictable, they said. Don't get too close. Don't let your guard down. But Dawn never treated Tilikum like a killer. She treated him like a wounded soul and herself like the one person who could reach him. It wasn't about control. It wasn't about dominance. It was about compassion. And that made her different, special. Dawn often told reporters, these whales are like family. You don't work this job unless you love them. And she did, deeply. Tilikum wasn't a trophy or a challenge to her, or he was someone. And even with all the risks, the tension, the unknowns, Dawn chose to believe in him. Every single day. But love, no matter how deep, doesn't always keep us safe. And as we'll see next, sometimes the bond we believe is unbreakable cracks under pressure. To the average guest at SeaWorld Orlando, Dawn, Brancheau, and Tilikum looked like magic. There she was, this calm, confident woman, standing just inches away from one of the most powerful predators on Earth. And there he was, this massive orca, black and white, like a living missile responding to her every signal with fluid grace. He'd splash on cue, leap when she waved, drift silently beside her in the water like a shadow that had chosen to trust her. Some would say it looked like choreography. Others swore it looked like love. But to Dawn, it was something even deeper, a bond built on respect, patience, and belief. They ate together, trained together, performed together. When the stadium lights dimmed and the crowd cleared, she'd stay late, review footage, check Tilikum's mood, whisper to him over the glass hand pressed against the tank wall like she could reach him through it. There were days he didn't respond well, days he sulked in the back pool, refusing to surface. But Dawn never saw those moments as failures, only as signs he needed more attention, more understanding. To her, Tilikum wasn't dangerous. He was misunderstood. What made their connection so astonishing wasn't just the size difference or the species barrier, it was the history. Tilikum had a past. He'd been ripped from the wild as a calf confined to small tanks passed from park to park. He had been blamed for not one but two deaths before arriving at SeaWorld. Any other trainer might have stayed away. Dawn didn't. She believed in rehabilitation, not just for people, but for animals too. That belief guided everything she did with Tilikum. And slowly, the world took notice. Videos of Dawn and Tilikum together surfaced online. In one, she rides on his back across the pool laughing. In another, he rests his chin on the ledge while she gently strokes his head, her voice barely louder than the humming pumps. Thousands of people commented, "I've never seen anything like this. They have something special. It's like they're talking." Parents brought their kids to see them perform. Tourists stood in line for hours to sit near the splash zone. Dawn and Tilikum were stars, not because of tricks, but because of the relationship. And for a time it worked. He obeyed. She trusted. And together they built a performance that made people feel something more than awe. They made them believe that man and beast could find harmony. But there's a quiet danger in bonds that seem too perfect. Because the truth is, no matter how close, how careful, how caring, we are still human. And they are still wild. Whales don't forget. Captivity doesn't erase instinct. And no bond, no matter how deeply felt, is immune to pressure. Some staff whispered concerns. Some marine experts raised flags. But Dawn, always composed, always hopeful, stood by her belief. "I know him," she'd say. "He knows me." It wasn't arrogance, it was faith. Faith that she could be the one who finally reached him. The one who understood what no one else could. And maybe she did. Maybe in those silent moments by the water, there was a connection neither science nor language could explain. But even the strongest ropes can snap. Even the gentlest hands can be bitten. And the bond that stunned the world was about to break in the most tragic way imaginable. By 2010, Dawn, Brancheau, and Tilikum had become icons at SeaWorld. Their bond, this unspoken rhythm between woman and whale, was the beating heart of the park's shows. Kids looked up to her, adults trusted her, and the company leaned on that image like a brand. But behind the smiles and splashes, there were cracks, and some people saw them. It started subtly. Tilikum began to act off. He would ignore hand signals he used to follow. He'd float listlessly at the back of the pool, refusing to engage. Other times he'd lash the water with his tail, soaking trainers unexpectedly. But Dawn didn't see aggression. She saw stress, fatigue, the cost of a captive life. She adjusted. She adapted. Some days he's just moody, she told a colleague, just like us. And that's the thing. Dawn believed Tilikum was like us. That belief made her special. It also made her vulnerable. Other trainers were more cautious. They noticed Tilikum's increasing unpredictability. Some refused to get in the water with him altogether. SeaWorld's own protocols forbade waterworks swimming in the pool with Tilikum since the late 1990s. He was simply too big, too strong, and too unpredictable. But that didn't mean he was off stage. He still performed, still interacted, still played the part. And Dawn, more than anyone, believed he was safe to work with, at least from land. He's just misunderstood, she often said. It was hard to argue. After all, she was the one who seemed to reach him. But warnings weren't just coming from inside. Experts from outside the park, marine biologists, animal behaviorists, had long raised red flags about captivity itself. They pointed out that wild orcas swim up to 100 miles a day. In tanks, they swam in circles. In the wild, they hunted, explored, socialized in massive pods. In parks, they waited for fish. Some showed signs of what psychologists now call zoochosis, a form of mental deterioration caused by captivity. Stereotypic behavior, teeth grinding, head bobbing, mood swings. And in Tilikum's case, the warning signs had a deadly history. 1991, Kelty Byrne, a 20-year-old part-time trainer in British Columbia. She slipped and fell into a tank. Tilikum and 2 other whales dragged her under. She drowned before rescuers could reach her. 1999, Daniel Dukes. A man sneaked into SeaWorld Orlando after hours. His body was found draped over Tilikum's back the next morning. Scratches, bruises. The whale never explained. And still Tilikum remained in shows, still part of the spectacle. The logic: he wasn't alone in those deaths. He was too valuable to lose. Some staff felt uneasy. They watched him stare a little too long at trainers walking past the pool. They noticed the moments when his behavior shifted, how his mood could go from calm to cold with no warning. They voiced concerns to supervisors. But SeaWorld, like many corporations, walked a fine line. Protect employees, yes, but protect the brand too. The show had to go on. And Dawn, being the most experienced, the most respected, was trusted to handle Tilikum. If anyone could keep him stable, it was her. But not all instincts should be ignored. One day, a colleague noticed Tilikum rolling onto his side eye fixed on Dawn longer than usual. Another noticed that when she leaned near the water, he didn't follow his usual cues. He stared at her hand. A guest even caught a moment on video when Tilikum lunged at the glass, unexpectedly startling everyone. It was brushed off. Just a fluke, someone joked. But nature doesn't joke, and instincts, especially in a 6-ton apex predator, aren't accidents. They're warnings. Dawn trusted Tilikum more than anyone else ever had, more than maybe she should have. Because when you love something enough, it's easy to dismiss the cracks. Easy to say he didn't mean it. Easy to think he wouldn't hurt me. But nature isn't built on emotion. It's built on instinct. And Tilikum had reached his breaking point. It was supposed to be an ordinary afternoon. February 24th, 2010. A partly cloudy day in Orlando, cool by Florida standards. Dawn Brancheau arrived early to prep for her schedule. She reviewed the show rundown, checked the feeding charts, said good morning to the animals as she always did. That day's event wasn't even a full performance. It was Dine with Shamu, a quieter, more personal experience. Families paid for a close-up meal by the water, while the orcas performed a few gentle behaviors. No flashy jumps, no intense stunts, just connection. Dawn, with her usual professionalism, greeted the guests, smiled for pictures, and performed basic interactions with Tilikum, the star attraction of the day. Everything seemed fine until it wasn't. The official show had ended. Guests were finishing their meals. Dawn stood poolside near the ledge, feeding Tilikum fish as a post-performance reward. They were wrapping up. And then it happened. In a blink. No dramatic music, no countdown, no warning. Tilikum lunged. Some witnesses said he grabbed her ponytail. Others said her wetsuit. Some accounts describe it like a game that went suddenly horribly wrong. But the reality was undeniable. He pulled her in, hard. The moment her body hit the water, gasps filled the air. A few guests even laughed at first. Maybe it was part of the act. Maybe she'd pop back up, smiling. She didn't. The water erupted. Tilikum began thrashing, dragging Dawn under, then launching her back to the surface. He wouldn't let go. Not for a second. The attack was violent, prolonged, and terrifying. Staff on deck scrambled. Emergency signals were triggered. Whale recall tones sounded calling the animals back to safety. But Tilikum wasn't listening. He wasn't following commands. He wasn't playing. He was taking control. Eyewitnesses described the scene with horror in their voices. She was underwater for so long. He kept shaking her, over and over. It didn't look like rage. It looked determined. For 45 minutes, Tilikum refused to release her. Rescue efforts were blocked by his size, his strength, and his unpredictability. Trainers tried distracting him, opening gates using nets, but nothing worked. By the time they finally retrieved her body, it was too late. Dawn was gone. She had suffered massive internal injuries. A broken back, fractured ribs, a detached scalp. Even her arm was severed. She died doing what she loved, but not in the way anyone ever imagined. The world reacted with disbelief. How could this happen? How could Tilikum, the whale she trusted most, the one she fed, trained, whispered to for years, be the one to kill her? SeaWorld immediately went into lockdown. Media swarmed the gates. Families who had watched in person were ushered away shaken. Trauma counselors were brought in for staff. And yet, even through the chaos, the most haunting part remained. Dawn wasn't in the water because of recklessness. She was there because she believed in him. No one could understand it. Not her family. Not the trainers who knew the risks. Not the guests who had seen the whole thing unfold. A woman who spent her life building trust, who saw animals not as performers, but as partners, had died in the arms of the very creature she loved most. It wasn't just a tragedy, it was a betrayal. And it shattered everything people thought they understood about the bond between human and animal. Tilikum was not punished. He was quarantine monitored at BMIN and eventually returned to limited performances. SeaWorld insisted it was a tragic anomaly, an unpredictable event. But others weren't so sure. Some called it the breaking point, years of stress, confinement, and captivity, boiling over into a moment of primal instinct. Others said it was avoidable. That Dawn, no matter how experienced, should never have been that close to him. But everyone agreed on one thing. What happened that day changed everything. The day Dawn Brancheau died, the world didn't just lose a trainer. It lost a symbol of trust between humans and wild animals. In SeaWorld, they lost the illusion of control. News broke within hours. The headlines were brutal: killer whale kills trainer at SeaWorld. Tilikum strikes again. Tragedy at Orlando theme park. But it wasn't just news. It was a reckoning. SeaWorld quickly suspended orca shows and launched an internal review. Tilikum was quarantined. They blamed trainer error. They said it was an accident, an unfortunate moment where boundaries were crossed. But people weren't buying it, because this wasn't the first time. Because the signs were there. Because some truths are too big to cover up with PR. And then came Blackfish. In 2013, the documentary exposed what insiders had whispered about for years: the trauma of captivity, the suppressed history of Tilikum's past, and the corporate culture that prioritized entertainment over ethics. Audiences were stunned. The smiling whales, the splash zones, the upbeat music, it all looked different now. It felt like a lie. SeaWorld's image collapsed. Protests broke out. Attendance dropped. Celebrities spoke out. The company's stock tanked. By 2016, SeaWorld publicly announced an end to their captive breeding program and phased out theatrical orca performances altogether. But for many, it was too late. Dawn's family never blamed Tilikum. They understood that he wasn't a monster. He was a product of his environment. A highly intelligent, emotionally complex animal trapped in a life that went against everything nature intended for him. He was stolen from the wild as a baby, held in tanks that could never replicate the ocean, forced into routine schedules and performances. He wasn't violent by nature. He was broken by captivity. Tilikum lived 7 more years after the attack. He died in 2017 at the age of 36, young by orca standards. He spent his final years mostly isolated, his health in decline. But his story never went away. He became a symbol of tragedy, of trauma, of how far human ambition will go in the name of profit, even when it means putting ourselves and the animals we claim to love in danger. To this day, people still debate what really happened. Was it a sudden snap, a tragic accident, or the slow boiling point of a lifetime of stress and suppression. Some believe Dawn let her guard down. Others believe she never stood a chance. But maybe the real question isn't why it happened. Maybe it's what it reveals about us. Because we do this again and again. We bring wild animals into our lives. We build zoos, aquariums, roadside shows. We dress up instincts as entertainment. We trade the ocean for concrete. And then we act surprised when something goes wrong. But should we be? Dawn Brancheau loved Tilikum. That part is not in question. She gave him patience, kindness, structure, and respect. She believed in the best version of him. And that makes what happened even harder to process. Because if someone like Dawn could fall victim to the very animal she trusted most, then what does that say about our relationship with the wild? So let me ask you this. Do you believe love is enough to change a wild animal's instinct? Or are we crossing lines we were never meant to touch? If it were you standing at that pool, would you have stepped closer or stayed behind the glass? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this story powerful, don't forget to subscribe to Animal Story for more real stories that challenge how we see animals and ourselves.